Hi everyone, welcome. We're starting today a new set of webcasts that we want to present to you. Um, the webcasts are a bit unique from what I saw that other people are offering. We're going to try and capture our thoughts and why we do things the way we do them. And this is going to be like a theme for all the webcasts. It's not about only the how to do things, but more importantly, on why we do things the way we do them. So I'll start by presenting myself. I'm Josh from DevOps Pro. I'm a senior DevOps architect, and I'll be presenting today. Today's topic is what are the considerations when creating a Node.js application, Node.js Docker image. And I'm going to focus on the development considerations because there is a big difference between a development image and a production image. And later on, we're going to have a webcast dedicated for the production Docker image. So for now, we're going to focus on the development side of things, and uh, and I want to start by saying, first of all, how important it is to work with the environment that it's going to be the same as production. So that's why we're using Docker. Docker, if you don't know it, it's a container technology. It basically allows you to wrap your application inside of an image. An image is a file, one file, and you can move that file between servers, between computers, and just run it. And it will run all the application inside of it. And the application contains all of your dependencies and everything that the application needs to run. So this is exactly why we want to use Docker also in the development environment. So it will be similar and it will be easier to replicate between us. So if we have a team of 5 people and I'm creating my own local environment, I want my environment to be the same, exactly the same as all of my teammates. So once we do that, we create the Docker image and we can distribute it to all of our people. That way, they have the same code, they have the same infrastructure that the application needs to run in. So this is something that helps you save a lot of time. Instead of, if you're onboarding new people and you don't want them to waste a day or two just setting up their local environment and making sure everything runs, the application is working, you want them to start working as soon as possible. So if you give them a Docker file, a Docker Compose file, and they just run one line and they have the full environment of the application, it's a big plus. It saves a lot of time and it reduces uh, the bitterness of developers since they have to install everything on their new computer. Um, Another reason we want to use Docker for our local environment also is the fact that we we might sometimes have different applications with different versions. If I'm talking about Node.js specifically, sometimes not all applications, are supposed to run on the same Node.js version. So if I have multiple applications and they're in different versions of Node.js, and instead of installing Node.js using NVM, which is the version manager, installing different versions all on locally on my computer, I can just use Docker, and inside the image, I just set up the node versions that I want to use for that specific application. So there's no collision. Everything runs in a different container. Everything is separated and isolated, and there's never any version mismatches or anything like that because it's installing like in a new machine. Um, so these are the main reasons why we first want to use Docker for local environment also. Um, this is a big ROI for your team, and I highly recommend using that. So after saying that, I want to move on to a bit of code. Um, I'm gonna show you a very simple Docker image file, Docker file. A Docker file, it's the file that describes an image, what the image should contain, And so I'm going to start with a simple one, not many dependencies, very, as you can see, very, very lean. But behind that simple file, there is a lot of thought. For example, we're going to start by, you know, from, which is basically the base image that we're going to inherit from. So it's going to be Node version 9. At the moment, it's 9. It can be something else. I can change it to 8. Everything that Docker Hub supports, I can just, you know, um, pull from there. Now, the reason we're using Node, uh, well, of course, because we're using Node.js, but the reason I'm stating it, I can inherit an image that is based on on Alpine Linux. Well, the difference, Node version is based on Debian. Now, the reason I chose Debian as my development environment is because it's a much more mature uh, distribution. Alpine also, but the main reason is Debian comes with a lot of packages that I need for development tools. Now, when I'm working with development, I wanted to make it as nice and easy for me to work on. So I install all these development libraries that help me, you know, check the code, lint it, make sure it's testable, run all the tests. Now, all these tools are not needed in production environment, so we don't want to install them. We in production environment, just a simple word on that, we want to make sure that the image is as small as possible. So it would be very easy and very quick to us to move the image from computer to computer since it's smaller. Now, for development, it's not a constraint. So we want to make sure that it's comfortable for us to use Docker in development. So we're using Node version and not Node with the Alpine version. Of course, there is an Alpine version. I'll show it in a different webcast. Um, so Node in the Debian version comes pre-packed with a lot of tools that help us install development tools for us. So it's a big plus to work with such an image in development. I'm using port 3000, which is common in the Node.js world. If you were using Express or something like that, it usually binds to port 3000. Um, Now, I always create a /app folder. This is a convention that I'm using. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to use the same convention. The thought behind that convention is that to have all my images look alike. So if I do /app, it means that my application is always inside that folder. So it's a convention of a specific place I want to put on my code. So no matter which image I go to, no matter which container I go to, I can always go to /app and I know that's where the application code is at. So I don't need to look for it in different folders and things like that. So this is a convention for me. After that, I'm setting the work dir to be /app so that every time I log into a container, uh, I can I can already be in the folder I want to be in. After that, add command, what it does, it basically copies the current directory, which is the dot, into /app. Usually when the Docker file is in the root of my code base, as you can see here. Docker file is in the root, and that's why I copy the current directory. After that, since I want to install dependencies, so I do run npm install. I have a package JSON, everything will be installed. And the CMD is it's the command that Docker will run once the container is created. So, and it's something very common. Now, uh, what basically this means, it will run our application inside of the container. In development, it's not usually what I want to do. Sometimes I run different commands because I may not want the application to work inside the container. I want to log into the container and maybe install some dependencies, work manually for a while, trying new things and things like that. And only then I want to run the application. So usually what I do the command here, I write what I want. And when I'm working in development, there is always a Docker Compose file. I never do a manual build, like run Docker build the image and then run it, Docker run. I always use Docker Compose. So what Docker Compose allows me to do, basically, it allows me to have a local environment with multiple uh, Docker containers that all of them are connected to the same application. So for example, if I need a database here in this application, I can, in Docker Compose, create uh, a new container with the database I need. Now, in this specific application, there is really no database or anything like that. As you can see, there is only the Node.js application. Now, basically what Docker Compose is going to do is going to build the current directory, which means it's going to look for a Docker file in the current directory and then build it. And as you can see, I set up a volume, which basically it's a mount between the container and my host. So every time I change a file in my current directory, it will be inside of the container also. So if my application is running in development and I change something, it's automatically being copied into inside of the container. So there is really no need for me to do anything else but that. Now, another thing I need or I want to do is map the port. So as I said, the container port is 3000 and I'm mapping it to the host to be also 3000. Now, the thing that you see comment here, it's the command. So if I open it, so the command will be overwritten, the command in the Docker file, the CMD in the Docker file will be overwritten by the Docker Compose file. So, and I usually use tail -f dev null to, a container needs always to run. If it stops, it means it's stopping. So it won't be up. And if it's up, I can also log into it. So making sure that the container will continue running, I do that by having an application, no matter what application, running in the foreground. So in development, I usually use tail -f /dev/null for that specific reason. When I do that, tail continues to run on null, so there is no output, there is nothing, and the container continues to run. So there is nothing, I can log into the container, run what I want, do what I want. I can create, run my application, my development server, change things, stop it, install dependencies again. I can work inside of the container. And since the ports are mapped to my host, I can just go to my browser, localhost 3000, and I'm reaching that application. Um, that's basically it. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. That's the thinking behind everything. Now, before I finish, I just want to point some security issues with that. Since I'm working in development, my security notion is it's looser. I'm less worried about security. The fact that if I want to share these things with my teammates, there is no code involved. All they have to do is git pull and they get the same Docker file and Docker Compose, and when they run it locally on their machine, it will use their code, the code on their machine. So there is really no security issues there. There's no password being passed in that form. Also, another thing to point, that Docker file uses root user. So, and I'm not changing that because it's comfortable for me to work in development. So these are things that you need to remember to keep in mind. But since you're working in development, just make sure you don't add to the Docker file like passwords. Like if I do env it declares environment variable, and then I can add password equals 1 2 3 4 5 6. That is something that you won't see in my Docker file because I don't want to pass that inside of a Docker file. So this is quick thing about security. Make sure your Docker images are always safe, even if you're working in development, even if you feel it's looser because it's development. It is looser, it uses root, but make sure you're not passing any passwords and things like that inside of the Docker file. Right, so that's basically it for today. Be sure to join us on our next webcasts. We're going to explore more Docker image and consideration behind Docker images for multiple languages and platforms. And we're going to do a lot more exciting things. Be sure to join us for next time. Thank you.